to start at the point of this interview and really really go to it, Ellen.
Oh, I have a transition back to coronavirus.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, so I saw a funny meme on the internet that made me think of you.
Oh, what was that?
It was, if these rules for public gatherings become any more restrictive, I'm going to have to start kicking some of these kids out of my house.
Yeah, I know what they're saying. Yeah,
like people right. with large families are like, oh, we're not allowed to gather together anymore because these rules are so restrictive.
Well, it is. I think look at my family. If you include the grandchildren, it's 33 people.
Yeah, you guys. I think that's illegal now.
It's illegal. We couldn't meet as a family.
I know. So what are your thoughts on this coronavirus? I've been really eager to talk to you about this because, I mean, we have my mass was canceled this weekend. We had no Catholic mass. And do you think it's hype? Do you think it's all just a media thing? Do you think it's the globalists who are trying to vaccinate everyone? Do you think that it's a legitimate threat? Do you think it was biological warfare done by either China or the United States? Do you think it's related to God's curse on the world? I was listening to a traditional Catholic podcast, Taylor Marshall, where he was insinuating that maybe it was a revenge from God because it started in China and Italy. Maybe it was revenge from God for throwing the Pachamama statues in the river, or rather from having the Pachamama statues in the cathedral during the Amazon Synod, and it was idolatry. And there's so many different people with these interpretations. Some people blame it on immigration, that Italy was hit because there were a lot of immigrants in Italy and they brought, tuberculosis or these other problems, health problems with them. I've heard so many interpretations. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on and if this is just hype or if it's an actual threat or what?
Well, I think, Ellen, that in terms of the Corona-19 virus, I think what we first have to look at is the secular side of it. And then we'll look at the spiritual or religious side of it.
Okay, that's a good plan.
On the secular side of it, I think that regardless of whether there is any real danger in terms of this virus, which we do not know, regardless of that, I think it's an effort at social engineering and economic engineering, a big time effort, almost as large as the demolition of the buildings on 9/11. That is, things have to get done that people in power want to get done in terms of how the world works, especially on their behalf. And they can't do that if there's just a gradualist kind of approach to life. As was said by the Project for the New American Century in 1996, that was a project that wrote a paper saying that the time has come in the 21st century to make the 21st century the American century. And therefore the time had come that we had to do all these things in terms of internal to the United States and external to the world, so that the United States could have full spectrum dominance of the world. And that program for New American Century was written by 29 people, among whom was Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, Jeb Bush, Scooter Libby, Elliott Abrams, George Weigel, and all the people who were deeply in power. That is, from the executive, presidential, right through to the Congress, when 9/11 occurred, when the planes hit the buildings. and 3 buildings came down with 2 planes hitting two buildings. But anyway, their notion was, and this is their words, that none of these things could take place that would make for the United States having full spectrum dominance of the world without a new Pearl Harbor. And what they meant by that is that the Chicago Sun-Times in 1941, on December 1st, recorded that over 90% of the American people wanted nothing to do with the war in Europe, nothing to do with what we know as the Second World War. They didn't want to go into it, etc. Indeed, Roosevelt had run in 1940 saying he would not send American boys to fight European wars. So on December 1st, 1940, 90% of the people, 1941, 90% of the people did not want to go into World War II. Then Pearl Harbor occurred on December 7th, 1941, and 1 week later, over 80% of the American people wanted to go to war. Pearl Harbor generated an atmosphere, if you will, of fear. And fear, fear is contagious, and when it gets into a community, it drives people to do all kinds of things they wouldn't otherwise do, because their rational powers are now governed by a sense of anxiety, insecurity, worry about evil and death and suffering, as they are not in normal times. And therefore, they make decisions that they otherwise wouldn't make. So that when the program for a new American century was put together in the 1996, they knew they needed a new Pearl Harbor. They knew they needed an extraordinary event that would make people fear and give up present rights, which rights they had to give up if the program for the new American century, full spectrum dominance of the world, was to take place. And then, of course, all these people, most of these people, were in power as vice president, defense secretary, etc., in the Bush administration when 9/11 happened. So now, so what we're faced with here, and which no one's talking about, is that in the United States, the media, mass media, which basically is 6 corporations that own 85% of all communications in the United States, from internet to television to radio to CDs to rap music, you name it. The media is radically, and I mean radically at its roots, compromised in terms of presenting people the truth, the factual truth of a matter. This is not about giving opinions. Opinions are fine. But factual truth. No one, I think one of the more recent things I saw, a month or so ago, was that people on media are trusted like used car salesmen. Because all you have to do is surf from one channel to another during the news. You hear the same news, almost word for word, from various people, and then you will hear, if you listen closely enough, slightly different facts being presented that contradict facts that are being presented someplace else in another network. The point being that everyone knows that the media can be used to generate fear. And the media has been used to generate fear. As far back as the Spanish-American War, the power people of the United States, the wealthy, the super rich, the robber barons, had for decades their eyes on Cuba as a place where they wanted to control because it was right off the Florida coast, and they just saw all kinds of possibilities there for making money, and making money in ways that would be illegal in the United States. But for some reason, Spain wouldn't give it up. And for some reason, the Cuban people didn't seem to want to give it up. And therefore, something had to be done to permit, morally in people's minds, to permit the United States to invade Cuba, and thereby to start the Spanish-American War in the late 1890s. But nothing was being done. Nothing. No one was doing. Spain was doing nothing wrong. The Cuban people were doing nothing. It just couldn't be handled that way. There is a telegram that exists from William Randolph Hearst, who owned a big chain of newspapers in the United States, the biggest, the Hearst Newspaper Corporation. And the telegram is to a reporter of his who is in Cuba. And the reporter says to him, he says in the telegram to the reporter, "You give me the necessary pictures and I'll give you a war." Meaning Hearst knew that he could whip up the people into outrage against the Spanish and everything else if he could just get the right kind of picture. And then, of course, the famous motto for the Spanish-American War was, "Remember the Maine." And the Maine was the American battleship in Havana Harbor that blew up soon after the telegram was sent. And immediately Hearst got the picture, put it on the front page of his nationwide papers, and proceeded to say that Spain did it. And he got the American people crazy in hatred of Spain and Spanish people and so forth and so on. And the idea that Cuba had to be part of the United States, it was right off the shore, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happened was there was a declaration of war, and we invaded Cuba, and Teddy Roosevelt went up the hill with his sword waving, you know. Well, it turns out that back in the late 1950s, Admiral Rickover with the approval of the Navy and the money of the Navy and so reinvestigated the blowing up of the battleship Maine, and the Spanish did not do it. They did not do it. His conclusion was that we're really not certain, the Spanish didn't do it, really not certain, but from all appearances, it looks like the munitions inside the battleship were poorly stored, and they blew up. But the American people, through the press, were sent into hatred, rage, revenge, on the basis of a picture in the Hearst newspapers. And so it was with Pearl Harbor. And so it was with the First World War. And then, of course, we know the Gulf of Tonkin. And then we know weapons of mass destruction. Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. So they're all lies.
And they're all lies. Didn't Nero do the same thing in Rome?
Nero! It's an old trick. Yeah, he did the same thing. The trickery. He blamed the fires of Rome on the Christians, and turned the whole Roman community against the Christians. And there it stayed, by the way, because how deeply it was put into the Christians remained an illegal religion from the time of Nero. From the time of Nero, which is in the 60s or 60 ADs, until 313, almost 300 years.
So this is like the oldest trick in the book, basically, is what you're saying.
That's right. That's right.
They figured
Creating,
this
you
out
got it.
long
Yep,
ago, long time ago.
you got it. And it's not just the United States. It's not just it's you name it. It is a way that politicians and media work together in order to induce fear, hatred, revenge collectively in people, and then under that auspices, they organize them under that auspices into a unity. They can't organize them any other way. So they organize them under the unity of fear, under the unity of hatred, revenge, retaliation. And now they got unity where there was no unity before. And on they can go manipulating them into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. At any rate, Ellen, what's taken place in the United States today is media is universally unbelievable. No one knows what to believe coming out of the mouths, coming out off the television or whatever the case may be.
Well, and I think that's one thing, that's one reason I have to interject this, and I have a feeling you'll disagree with me, but I think that's one reason why people like Trump is because he calls out the fake news and he calls out the media for being essentially what they are. And I think he's kind of the voice of the people that way, who have long seen that our media is not telling us the truth. They completely don't report certain things that are reportable. They over-report, they misinform, they disinform. And so now I feel like people are kind of getting clued in to the fact that the media, the mainstream media anyway, is not reliable.
I think you're absolutely right. The only little caveat I put in there about that is that Donald Trump and the people that support him, the media that supports him, Clear Channel and Fox and so forth and so on, they do the same thing in his behalf. So this is the way that it is done. And by the way, it's just not reporting what's wrong or reporting facts. Actually, it's what you don't report,
Right.
what you don't say. That's every bit as important as what you do say. And so anyway, all I'm raising there is we're talking now in terms of this coronavirus 19. I don't know what to make of it. I know the media is universally behind it. And the Boston Globe has story after story, the television has story after story of reporting the virus, what to do, and everything else, blah, blah, blah. I'm having a hard time finding how many people have contracted the virus who have been tested and how many people who died who have been tested before they died had the virus. I see a lot of numbers out there.
Because there's a lot of people with tuberculosis anyway who could be dying of that. And so are these people who have dying, have they all been tested? And
I don't know that. I can't find that out. And I watch. Now, the other thing about the media, of course, is the one thing we can say is that, well, now you have the internet and information gets out there. But there's a whole world in government and politics whose sole purpose is to put out disinformation on the computer, to use the computer to lie, to set up, in other words, to detour people's thoughts, to put them in another way, whatever the case may be.
And they do that not only by producing content, but by actually having these people whose job is to comment on other things, to create an impression of dissent or disagreeing opinion or agreement. So they're out there commenting on things, and you don't know if they're real people with real opinions or if they're paid by the government to comment and make that comment. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I know that, for example, the group that is most involved and has been involved for 20 years in investigating the demolition of the three buildings on September 11th, 2001 called 911 Truth. They have put out, dozens of videos. But one of the videos they put out, it is in several of it. It's actually in several of them. Is national reporters, CBS, NBC, BBC, etc., say, asking people immediately after the buildings fell, while the smoke is still in the air, while people are running, asking them what happened. And these people not only say what happened, but they also insinuate that it was Arabs who did it, Arab terrorists. This is before anyone knows anything. And when they investigated who a lot of these people were, they were actors. They were actors. And that's how different is that from the fact that on 911, there's that British BBC commentator, and she gets on with breaking news that Building 3 has just collapsed because of the planes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on the news, there is the time right next to it. It's 5:01 or 5:02 p.m. And right in back of her is Building 3 standing perfectly. Building 3 didn't collapse till 5:28. The 2 minutes after she said that, all of BBC closed down.
Mm-hmm.
Now what the point is, the point is, how do you get correct information about the coronavirus? Regardless of how long you took in the shower this morning, you now have 380 trillion viruses all over you and in you. 380 trillion viruses. No one's being told this. We're inundated with viruses and bacteria. I just mentioned that because my feeling is that what's taking place is with mass media, with government, and of course always with the money behind government that bribes the particular people who need millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to get into office, is that this is like a lobster in the pot kind of thing, similar to 911. You know the story of the lobster in the pot?
I know the frogs in the boiling water.
Yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
You put the lobster in a hot pot, and the thing will literally jump to the floor. Literally. It can't take it. But if you put the lobster in tepid water and just gradually increase the heat, it'll stay there and die.
Because it's happening in such small increments that you don't know what's happening.
It becomes normalized to the lobster. Even though it's killing him, it's normalized. And so back in 1973, were you born in 73?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. I forget. Yeah.
I was born in 78.
Gee, you missed. Oh, you got the last one. You got the second one. But in 73 was the great gasoline crisis. And people were told we're running out of gasoline. We only have 25 oil. We're running out of oil. We only have 25 years left at most, And in 1973, before the gasoline crisis of October of that year, gas was 18 cents a gallon. Once that crisis started, it went up, 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 and it's never stopped going up. It's never come down. However, there were long miles trying to get into a gas station. Gas stations were we're experiencing no gas deliveries. Ellen, it was artificial scarcity.
Really?
There's more oil and gas underneath the ground than we could possibly use until the second coming.
So they just want us to be, is it the toilet paper manufacturers who are behind all this?
No. Let's not bring your personal life into this now. No. The gasoline was a very, very particular sort of thing. It is a huge money maker, and it can think all the cars on the Los Angeles Expressway and the Boston Southeast, and every day in and day out, they're burning gasoline. This is a big money maker. Now, if you can raise the price on this even by a couple of pennies. In 1973, the early part of 1973, and long before that, because I remember this even as a kid, gasoline stations would be giving out gifts if you came to them to buy their gas, 6 glasses or something like that, to drink out of. After 1973, people were practically crawling in on their knees begging for gas because an artificial scarcity was created. And then after they raised the price to the point that they felt that not just that they got the money that they wanted, but they had inculcated the fear of the loss of gasoline enough, then they cut it off at whatever they cut it off at in those days, 85 cents or something. Then they redid the whole thing in 79, and you would have been around for that, but you probably didn't remember it, having been born in 78. Anyway, the point was it was media, just like William Randolph Hearst, remember the Maine, or remember the Lusitania, and on we could go, or Tonkin Gulf, on we go. Just like all of those, it was the media generating up fear, and giving false facts, fake facts, just like Trump says. Now, he does the same thing himself, and Fox does, and Clear Channel does. They all do it. But my point was, if you remember where I started with this, was American mass media is so compromised that no one can possibly figure out what the truth of this is, this virus 19.
Okay, so I want to ask you one more thing before we move on to whenever you want, to the spiritual part, because we're still talking about the secular part. But I'm really curious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious about whether you think this is a natural phenomenon, but simply a case of don't let a crisis go to waste. So this thing happened, and people are seizing the opportunity to put forth their agenda and create their new world or whatever. Or do you think it was done on purpose? Like they actually created an actual virus and unleashed it strategically? It has not escaped my attention that Iran and China were the ones that were hit by this the most. And I don't know how Italy figures into that.
Italy.
Is this just a natural phenomenon and they're not letting the crisis go to waste, or was it an orchestrated event? Or is there no virus and it's just all a phantom?
I tend to think there probably is something that's the coronavirus 19.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's what it's. There's no indication out there presently of its lethality. It's a virus.
Right.
It's a virus. Do you know how many people die in this country every year just from the viruses from flu? 38,000 a year in this country alone. Worldwide, it goes into hundreds of thousands. It's a virus.
Yeah.
And viruses spread like viruses spread.
So the idea that we're crippling entire economies and making the world come to a screeching halt is a little strange.
It's more than strange. It's planned. That's what I meant by the term social engineering at the beginning of our talk today.
So planned in order to kind of get us ready for the next phase of their plan, which they couldn't otherwise implement.
It's a plan to bring in a new social reality into the world and a new economic reality. Let me give you an example. What is the biggest carrier of viruses and bacteria in the world outside of the human body and in the body of other mammals? Money. The dollar bill.
The cashless society.
There you go. The plastic society.
Oh, yeah.
It's a small step. We just can't use real money anymore. It's loaded with viruses that are going to kill you.
And also with cash, you can do things that are not traceable by the government, which they can't have. We can't have people barred. I remember one time I went to do my taxes and they wanted me to report any bartering that I did with my time and my talents in order to pay taxes on that. I was like, are you kidding me? That's how badly they want to get rid of cash, because they want to track your every movement. And of course, if they can turn off your digital supply of money, which they can do easier than with cash, then they can completely control you, right?
They can do it by a button. And not only that, there was, I don't know if you ever saw the movie with Will Smith. Excellent, super movie with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. Absolutely, way ahead of its time. I think it was 1988 it was made, called The Enemy of the State. It's a must-see movie, Enemy of the State. But the big thing about the cashless society is they can trace your every step, every place you go, because you couldn't get an ice cream cone without plastic.
And they can already do that with
control.
Our cell phones.
And that means control. But the big thing about the cashless society is they can trace your every step, every place you go, because you couldn't get an ice cream cone without plastic.
And they can already do that with
control.
Our cell phones.
And that means control.
Yeah.
And we often forget when we talk about control by the government, or we talk about control by the economic elites, or the oligarchs, or control by big business, or whatever the case may be, control by the politicians, control by the military. Those terms, government, politicians, military, et cetera, those are sociological terms. What it means is those terms are, in fact, not controlling anything. What is controlling, because they have no center of personality in which to make decisions, they have no will. What is controlling is the people who act under that auspices of government, military, whatever the case may, the individuals. And those individuals, whoever they are, wherever they are, Russia, the United States, and so forth, are universally subject to the same consequences of original sin as anyone else. And they can have all this information about John Jones, and that's fine, but they themselves are subject to the 7 capital sins: hatred, revenge, anger, as well as all the other physical stuff. So by saying it's the state that does it, or the military that does it, the state and the military are just sociological terms for what is the real entity doing anything, and that's the individual person making decisions. In handing your privacy over to the state, you are handing it over to maybe 50 million people individually to look at it. As one guy told me who worked for an insurance company, an executive insurance company just years ago, he said, I can find out anything I want about anyone's medical records. And I said, sure, of course he can. Of course he can. And he can use it to blackmail. And he can use it. Anyway, all I'm saying is that controlling people through the state, or through state operations and so forth, is not about the state or the military or anyone else. It's about handing privacy, your private life, over to people who are no better or no worse than you are, and who are subject to all kinds of vicissitudes that the human condition subjects us to. Some guy gets out of bed in the morning, has a bad morning with his wife or his husband, and goes out to goes out to work for the IRS, and God help the first person that comes in. You know, so
This is why I love you, Charlie, and I've always just listened to every word you say, because I feel like there are no other Catholic spiritual leaders who speak like this. All I hear from the bishops and my priests is this constant like obeisance and complicity and cooperation with whatever those in power are saying at the time. And I feel like this is what I'm witnessing now from the Catholic Church. I'm not hearing any of this. I'm not seeing any pushback. I'm not seeing any independence of thought, any critical, rational look at what's happening in society. They're all just going along with it. And they're providing no counter perspective, no other views. And it's just, honestly, it just sickens me. I'm like, what's with you guys? Like, it's like you just accept what you hear on NPR or CNN or Counterpunch or Fox News and just go with it. And it really upsets me. So it's like I'm always so happy to hear like a spiritual leader who can kind of see through, I don't know, the matrix or whatever.
well,
Do you know what I mean?
Ellen, I mean, we're talking about the coronavirus 19 now, but in terms of what you're saying, tomorrow, March 19th, will be the beginning of the war that is going on to this day. Iraq 2, going on to this day. The bombing started. That would be, 17 years ago tomorrow.
Yeah, and actually on Friday, I'm having an interview with Mark Sibilia Carver about the CatholicCostOfWar.org.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been thinking about this. But go ahead.
But look at all the deaths. Look at all the maimings. Not only of American soldiers and American boys and girls have gone over there to kill because Bush or Obama or Trump sent them over there, and they took the orders and went. But all the people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, all of whom been torn apart, killed, families, on and on. How many millions upon millions of people have been thrown into misery by the killing of people there, by the killing of people by people here, United States, 7,000 miles away, who send their soldiers, their smart bombs, their drones, their B-52s, their fighter jets, all in there to decapitate, to maim, to destroy. And not a word from the Catholic bishops of the United States in 17 years that this is evil and that their people cannot go to it because it is radical evil. Not a word. 17 years.
Yeah.
So the fact they're not saying anything about the coronavirus, except we'll close the churches down, the masses down, and everything else. No, that's minor compared to what they've been doing for the last 17 years with this catastrophic destruction of human life in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I've been hearing a lot about the situation with China and Pope Francis, and I guess I don't understand all of it, but it sounds like there was something called the Patriotic Church in China, which was basically a Catholic church but it was controlled by the communist Chinese government. And then there was an underground Catholic church, and the old Patriotic Church was basically like the bishops were appointed by the communist officials, and they told their people, hey, you want a Catholic church? We'll give you one. But it's going to be our guys that are going to be running it. And the crucifix in the churches is going to be replaced with the Chinese flag. And it's all going to be about the state. And then you're going to have the underground church, which is going to be more the renegades, the people who are loyal to Rome over the people who are loyal to China. And I've been thinking a little bit about this, and it seems to me we have something like that here. We have the Patriotic Church of America, which is the bishops who basically bow to the government at every turn and do whatever they say. and never question them, never push back. And it seems to me it's like, granted, President Trump can't appoint American bishops. Okay, granted. But there seems to be something of the same effect in the long run, where you have a complete complicity between the United States Catholic Church and the United States government.
Well,
what do you think about that?
Of course you do. Of course you do. And while President Trump cannot appoint Catholic bishops, any president of the United States can just communicate with the apostolic nuncio that they don't want this guy being a bishop, or or straighten him out. The example of that is Bishop Hunthausen out in Washington, who called the nuclear fleet in the harbor there, the nuclear submarine fleet, an Auschwitz waiting to happen, and said he wasn't going to pay taxes for that. And it was only a matter of weeks before the Secretary of State went down to the Apostolic Nuncio, and the Apostolic Nuncio told Rome that Secretary of State didn't want it. And lo and behold, Hunthausen was notified by the Catholic bishop, by the Curia, that he could remain as the bishop, but he would have no power except to ordain. They were sending a bishop from Rome to actually run the diocese, and that he was under investigation for liturgical abnormalities.
Wait, so what is the papal? A question from the plebe here. What is the papal nuncio? Like, what is that?
The papal nuncio is a gimmick. Since it's the Vatican ambassador to the United States. He has all diplomatic power. It's just a name. He has all the diplomatic powers and rights and protections of an ambassador from any country in the world to the United States, which are total. And he's the ambassador from the Vatican City State, which is officially a nation state, to the United States. His contact is directly back to the Curia. He responds only to the Curia in Rome. He does not respond to any American bishop or anything else. But if people want something done from the top level, that's where they go, because he can go right back to Rome and get it done. So that's the ambassador, the apostolic nuncio in the United States. He is the ambassador by another name.
So when Bishop Hunthausen did this, he kind of got reprimanded for it.
Oh, kind of. They took his diocese away from him. And then they began investigating him for liturgical dance and for all kinds of things that were being thrown up in the right-wing Catholic press about all the kinds of abnormalities, never sexual abuse, huh? And so that he was ruined. He absolutely ruined by innuendo and so forth and so on. And of course, if the Pope takes you out of your job, and fine, he'll let you ordain priest and give confirmation. But if he has someone else running the job, this bishop he sent from Rome by the name of Whirl, well, by golly, then something's really wrong with you. Well,
is this the world that ended up in Chicago?
This is the world that ended up as Cardinal Archbishop of Washington. At any rate, this became so upsetting. It's one of the few times the American bishops became upset about anything, but I think they could see the handwriting on the wall in terms
Charlie,
of...
what year was this?
Oh, gosh, what year was this? This is way back. John Paul II was Pope. And, John Paul II was Pope. And the Secretary of State of the United States was James, because he's the one that went down to the papal nuncio's office to talk to him on this. Can't remember, famous politician in Washington. This would have been back,
like
it seems
80s?
to me in late 80s, early 90s, maybe.
Okay, and can you just say one more time, what exactly did Hunthausen do that was so that
Hunthausen more and more became upset with the fact that the nuclear submarine base was in his diocese on the West Coast. Nuclear submarines.
oh, and bishops are just supposed to overlook that and completely
Right.
pretend like it's not there.
Even though Catholics are half or a third of the population of them running these things, eh?
Okay.
So he referred to them as something like Auschwitz is waiting to happen. You know, at that time, I think they were all armed with MIRV nuclear weapons, which meant they were all armed with nuclear weapons that had multiple um, multiple heads on them, up to 20 heads on them, that could spray nuclear bombs all over where they land for hundreds of miles. At any rate, he called it Auschwitz waiting to happen, or something like that. But
Okay.
he also said he was withholding taxes. And that's when, geez, I'm saying James McFarland, but that's not it now. I'll think of it after I get off. Was Secretary of State under Reagan. And anyway,
So he wasn't going to file his taxes that year? Because
he was, no, I think what he said was he was going to take the part that went to nuclear weapons and send it to a humanitarian fund.
okay.
Well, anyway, it's not they care about a few dollars. What they cared about was
Message he was
the
sending.
message he was sending.
Yeah. We
And
can't have Catholics trying to follow that kind of an example.
that would be terrible. And that's why they went to Rome, and Rome clamped down on them and actually crushed them. Well, just to finish the story, as this thing went through, it's one bad stage after another, and one thing after another, and he was being pilloried in Catholic press and secular press, and but right-wing stuff, and of course, you never win an argument against the press because they got a daily, access to thousands of millions of minds. Well, anyway, at some point, the American bishops decided that this thing that was going on with Rome and Archbishop Hunthausen, was a threat to them. I don't know exactly. I can see how. So what they decided was the American Catholic bishops, would form a commission to investigate Hunthausen to see which of these accusations were true and which of them were not true, and whether he should have had his administrative duties as Archbishop removed from him, or whether not. And so they investigated it, and the head of that investigation was Cardinal John O'Connor of New York, who was in tight with John Paul II, and he was, everything, ex-military chaplain, all that. And they came to the conclusion Hunthausen did nothing. Nothing. They never said anything about what he said about Auschwitz and never said anything about the tax. This was all, they went after something else. The bishops concluded that Hunthausen did nothing as an archbishop that was not perfectly acceptable. In fact, he was an exemplary archbishop. And they send that on to Rome with the suggestion that all things be removed from his record that were negative, which they did. And Rome restored him, and
that's good.
And Worrell went on to be, I think, Bishop of Pittsburgh, and then Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and then eventually soon after that, I think Hunthausen got cancer and he retired, but he lived. He went, and I guess he went out to Montana where he grew up and so forth, and lived till he was 95.
I remember when a few years ago, I had him on my list of top 10 people that I wanted to interview, but I think he just died a a couple of few years ago, maybe.
Just recently, yeah. Within the year, maybe something, 2 years, maybe. Yeah.
He was always somebody I wanted to talk to.
He was a very, very good man. It seemed like a very good man, very genuine archbishop, priest, that sort of business there. No personal accusations against him of any kind, But anyway, the reason I say that, because it's become kind of his name, Hunthausen, it's become kind of a generic term for when bishops or the state goes after someone in the Catholic Church for something they did politically, but they can't raise it that way. They try to go after it in terms of something he did theologically or liturgically or something like that. He's being Hunthausened, never mentioning the real reason they're going after him.
Which was that he displeased the U.S. government by speaking out against the nuclear warfare. And
in displeasing the U.S. government at that level, he was displeasing the Curia in Rome, who know downright well that the U.S. government gives the Catholic Church in various forms billions of dollars a year.
Right.
Get back to coronavirus. I think by now, Ellen, let's see, how many times? I think by now you probably have not 380 viruses all over you. You may probably have 400 trillion viruses all over you.
Oh, no.
It's later in the day,
Well, double that, because, working from home, those of you who work from home might know you don't shower every morning. Why? You're not going to see anybody.
Oh, God. Oh,
so now it could be like 97 billion trillion or something. I don't know.
Gosh, you're a regular zoo for viruses. Oh, my goodness. I don't know if I can even talk to you over the computer if you don't shower every day.
I know.
Didn't you ever hear that cleanliness is next to godliness? You've got to. Now, this is just marital advice from someone who's been married for 53 years. You have to keep yourself comely, at least.
Now, Charlie, when you would get home, would Mary have a hot meal on the table and have her hair done and in her heels and like?
Oh, no.
Scotch or whatever. Like, did that all happen?
No, but she took a shower every day.
Yeah. I do shower. I'm kidding. I shower every day. But
no, you're just making that up now just to impress the audience. I can see that.
I'm just saying, when you work from home, it's a different ballgame sometimes,
And that's part of the social engineering that's going on.
What do you mean?
Getting people to work on computers from home, to teach, to be in the office. It's part of the social engineering that's going on with this coronavirus 19.
Driving cars and emitting carbon dioxide.
That's right. Everything is being changed, Ellen. Believe me. And once things are normalized under the crises, Once things are normalized, then they become almost impossible to go back to the way it was.
It's just, yeah. So you kind of think there's like a big plan here.
Oh, yes, there is. No, at least that's my feeling. My feeling is now, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, one Romans 13 is fine. It says obey civil authorities, And so if civil authorities tell you to drive on the right-hand side of the road rather than the left-hand side of the road, that's fine with me, or left rather than right. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with obeying civil authorities. Now, of course, you can't obey them if they tell you to go out and kill 6 million Jews.
Right.
And by the way, just parenthetically, which your audience may not know, Hitler didn't do a single illegal thing while he was head of Germany. Not one illegal act. They couldn't, not he or his lieutenants, not Goering, not anyone else. Everything had been made law that he did, and that's why the Nuremberg war trials had to invent that terrible standard of crimes against humanity. Totally arbitrary, no basis whatsoever, never existed before. An ex post facto law, a law made after the fact, which even even General Curtis LeMay, who undertook the fire bombings of Japan and was involved with the atomic bombings of Japan, and was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, at the time of the Cuba crisis with John F. Kennedy. He was the Air Force member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and wanted to just nuke Cuba. He said himself, General Curtis LeMay said, if the United States hadn't won World War II, I would have been executed as a war criminal. Everyone knows that. The crimes against humanity standard that was put in there because Hitler made sure he did everything legally, that was put in there because he did nothing illegal. They had to make something up. What are crimes against humanity? What is the United States doing over in Iraq and in Afghanistan and Syria? What are they doing? What were they doing in Vietnam? Are those crimes against humanity? Of course. What I'm saying is the victor judges what a crime is against humanity. So I think that it's very important to, first of all, recognize Romans 13, obey civil authorities. That's fine. If they want you to stay off the streets because of the virus, that's fine. That's their judgment. Now stay off the street. Or ride on the right-hand side of the road. But if they want you to do something that is contrary to the gospel, at that point there, that's where the rubber hits the road as to whether you're going to follow Jesus or follow Hitler or Trump or whatever.
It's hard now because I think back to everything that's happened in our country since 9/11 and questioning these things. It's like, for example, vaccines. I've heard that a lot of people think that COVID-19, coronavirus, was unleashed to make everyone afraid so that we would subject ourselves to kind of these universal vaccines with God only knows what's in them. And so you think about something like vaccines, you can't necessarily make a good argument that vaccines are either in compliance with or against the gospel. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's hard that with a lot, or you go to the airport and they take a picture of your naked body. Basically, every time we go through the TSA, we're getting the biometrics kind of image taken of our body. To me, that's always really bothered me, that we allow ourselves to be photographed like that for, quote, security purposes. But it's like, I feel like things are just kind of getting to the point where it's hard to even know anymore. Like, what does this relate to Christianity? Or is it something that we need to address? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? It's not always easy to go back to the gospel and be like, well, what would Jesus say about the TSA? Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and I do know that even by the standard of the new commandment, love one another as I have loved you, you still have to make the personal conscience decision about what does that mean in this situation. Would Jesus do this, or would he do that, or would he not do this, or not do that? And you've got to make it according to a standard of probability that is at least 50-40, that he'd do it, or you can't choose that way. But this is part of what's going on with the media. You can't make that decision because they're not giving you the facts. They're not giving you the facts. I have stuff here. I literally have pages and pages of medical journal stuff here, science journal stuff here on the dangers of vaccination to little children. There's a real problem, and it's getting out there, and it's getting out. But I just read last week, a law has been introduced in the Parliament of England to make it a criminal offense to say that viruses are dangerous. Vaccination is dangerous in any form.
Yeah, and you were talking to me just the other night, kind of off the record, about 5G and the harm of 5G and how that's not allowed to be out there.
If you can't get the facts, You can't make the decision, see? And the fact is, it's one now. Just to give an example of this, if you're not going to follow Jesus, if you're Catholic, and you're not going to follow Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love of friends and enemies, which are the teaching in the gospel, and you decide to employ what the church gives as an exception to those teachings, which is the Catholic just war theory, there are several standards to judge whether the war is just or not, both in its inception and in its execution. If one of those standards is not met, then the war is unjust, and you cannot participate in an unjust war because the killing in it is unjust killing and therefore murder, which is a grave intrinsic evil in the Catholic Church. That being the case, I'd say that maybe 90% or 95%, 98% of Catholics who call on the just war theory to defend Catholics going to war and them supporting war have no idea what the standards of the just war theory are in the Catholic Church, and have no idea how to apply them because they've never been taught.
Or they don't have any facts about the actual war.
Now, that's the second part.
Yeah.
How can you say that you give the government the presumption of truth where there's war involved when everyone knows since Aeschylus, way back there, 500 years before Jesus, that truth is the first casualty of war? How can you give the presumption of truth to the government when they start talking about war? When this has been known from the beginning of recorded history, what happens with governments once war is on the horizon. Truth goes out the window, and what's said as truth is just what they want to put out there to make their case for going to war.
And there's always a simultaneous psychological war going on at the same time.
That's right, all the time. And so what responsibility is there to the Catholic bishops, say, of the United States, to get the facts about what's going on and to present them to the people? For example, if you've got if you've got 1 million civilians dead because of the United States bombing and all that stuff over in Iraq and Afghanistan, 1 million civilians dead or maimed, shouldn't the bishops be able to step up and say, well, here are the facts. Now, we've got to weigh these. Since non-combatant immunity is essential to the just war theory and has been since Augustine, what are we going to do here? No, not a word. They make believe that the just war theory is known by the whole Catholic community.
And the people in the Pentagon want nothing but the truth and freedom and all that stuff.
That's how they put it. And they're all standing around. They're all standing around shaking and hugging generals and this, that, and the other thing at their annual meetings down in Baltimore at the Marriott Hotel. And as I think I told you, the United States military puts on a dinner every Tuesday night that they come to the Baltimore meeting, the second meeting of the year, for all the bishops to come to and to eat, drink, and be merry in. But the point is, isn't there if you're a bishop of a diocese, isn't there a moral responsibility to tell your people, these are the facts that you have, here's the theory, and here are the facts that as we know them at least today. And when you're a bishop in the Catholic Church, you've got access to facts that the media does not want people to hear, because you've got access to facts that the intelligence services of the Catholic Church, which is the best in the world, have, and you can present them.
Wait, what? We have intelligence services in the Catholic Church?
Oh, sure.
Really? I didn't know that. I mean, I'm thinking the bishops probably think it's the media's job to find the facts. That's not my job. But you're saying they have access to information that we don't?
It's job to educate the Catholic populace about the facts. But let me see who it was. It was the guy that worked in the Vatican. He was Cardinal Bea's secretary, And Cardinal Bia was Pius XII's confessor, and Malachi Martin, he was a Jesuit priest, smart man. And I know he became disenchanted with the Catholic Church, and I think he went over to one of those old Roman Catholic churches, etc., years and years later after. But he writes in one of his books that Russia, China, England, France, Germany, the United States all have the Vatican bugged because the Vatican has the best intelligence service in the world.
No way, really?
Because it has on the ground people who are trusted by the people in the particular territory, who talk to them, and they relate back to their bishops what's going on, and the bishops relate it back to Rome. It's an intelligence service without portfolio, but it gathers more intelligence about what's going on than the CIA, the FBI, the Mossad, or even, MI6 or whatever.
Wow.
So that being the case, the Vatican could tell the the Pope could tell the bishop, look, inform your people that 1 million civilians have been killed and maimed by munitions and people from your country, and lay it out there what the problem is with this in terms of the just war and non-combatant immunity, etc. But bishops never say anything about the facts of the situation. Not a word.
And, I was reading about, I heard in a podcast, it was Monica Perez out of Atlanta. I don't remember all the facts exactly, but basically there was something called like Agenda 2020 or something. And there was an agenda put out by the Davos, who are the Davos camp or some
Davos.
Some meeting of oligarchs and high-powered people or whatever.
Out in Switzerland, in the city of Davos. Yep.
And they, put out these agendas for the year 2020 and kind of getting the world on board behind whatever you want to call it, the globalist plan, the New World Order. And one of the things that they needed was the support of faith leaders, kind of to instill this authoritarianism in society. They needed to get the religious leaders. Without the religious leaders, they were never going to be able to enact their plan.
Oh, they know what they're doing. Yeah, sure, they know what they're doing.
When I read that, I was like, well, that explains why the Catholic Church is this falling in line with closing down masses and sending the exact same message as the mainstream media. There's no counter perspective. There's no perspective at all. There's no context. There's no other ways of looking at it. It's basically like the Catholic Church is the mouthpiece for whoever it is that wants something to happen from this virus. There's nothing else. They're just falling in line completely.
Well, remember with this virus now, it's that our present position, people like you and I, ordinary people, our present position is we have no way of knowing what the truth about it is. There's no way. We got no way of knowing what the truth about it is. All we know is what the government is saying, and what the media is saying, and that's highly, highly suspect because of a history of media and government saying things. Extremely suspect. I don't know if you'd even give it the benefit of credence, or the benefit of the doubt, but we don't know. But what we do know is now, because the facts are out, we do know what's been going on for 17 years in the Middle East with the United States, sending everything from 18-year-old kids armed with machine guns to drones that require the most sophisticated kinds of technology to destroy people, and they've destroyed them by the millions. We do know that, and therefore, instead of calling, as I would not call the bishops on the virus at this moment in time, although I'll talk about that later. I would call the bishops on their support of the murder in the Middle East by Catholics sent there by the United States government. And by murder, I don't mean that anyone who's ever gone over there, the 18-year-old kid that goes over there, necessarily sins. Murder is when you know that you're doing an evil, the evil of killing someone unjustly, and you do it. I suspect the vast majority of these kids from who can't get a job, and they have no idea. They have no idea about. They just get with the propaganda from the government about what's good and what's evil, and that's it.
Yeah.
So no, I think that the biggest problem. I mean, the coronavirus is about, as far as I can see, whether it's real or not, and how much of it that is real in the sense of its power to destroy people or not. It's a virus, and it's being used by government, and the difference between government and those who run and own corporate media is insignificant. They're the same people. It's just it's the Davos group, if you want to call it that. That's what they are, and they're going for full spectrum dominance.
And I thought there was something off about it from the beginning, but I think it really hit me when, I mean, let's face it, coverage of the Catholic Church in the mainstream press is almost always negative. We hear about sex scandals, defrocked priests, financial scandals. It's almost always negative. And even if you just go watch any movie with a priest or a nun in it, it's going to be negative, a negative portrayal. They're sexually repressed. They're perverts. There's something weird or disturbing going on. And all of a sudden I see pop up, I think it was in the Washington Post or the New York Times, an article about a nun. And it's like, this nun has been practicing social distancing for years. She's going to explain to you how it's done. And she's there with like a basket of vegetables, like picked from her garden. And all of a sudden we have positive coverage of a nun when it serves their purpose of the whole social distancing narrative. I was like, this is just too bizarre. I don't know if I can handle it.
Well, if the Catholic Church wants to be a non-profit, which it is, corporation, profit, then it's going to have to be a non-profit, prophet, organization also, because the non-profit 5013C is given by the government, and it gives the Catholic Church tremendous funds by not having to pay all kinds of taxes. But it can be pulled at any minute. It can be pulled, and I would suggest to you that it will be pulled and could be pulled, and every bishop knows that, and they're taught that, to watch their step in terms of criticizing the government, because they could pull this tax break, that tax break, or all tax breaks if they wanted. So if you're going to be a non-profit profit organization, then you're going to be a non-profit phet organization. But Christians are baptized into being into Christ, being priest, prophet, and king. Once they become a non-profit organization, they're leaving out a major segment of what they should be, the church leaders.
Okay. So what do we do as Catholics and people who want to follow Jesus and just remain, I don't know, just have the peace of Christ in our hearts? Like, we know that our bishops are completely, off the rails with they're basically a mouthpiece for the government. The media, we can't trust them. They're not going to give us the facts. Our government is all about the business of psychological warfare and lying and God knows what other kind of biological or traditional warfare. So what do we do in the midst of all this? Like, what are we, we can't find the truth, or it's very difficult to find the truth or the facts. We don't want to be, irresponsible toward our fellow man by spreading germs or whatever.
All woman. Hello,
or woman, yeah. And, yes, some of us will start showering every day instead of
very good start.
But what do we do? Like, how do we handle this? Do you have any advice for us?
I'd say The best piece of advice I could give to anyone, absolutely anyone, is Christ is risen. That's it. Don't need anything else other than that. Christ is risen.
Well, that's very simple.
I lay it on the line. I'm not here to. This is it. This is the good news. St. Paul says, if Christ isn't risen, our faith is in vain. It's absolutely right.
Okay. So what do we do as Catholics and people who want to follow Jesus and just remain, I don't know, just have the peace of Christ in our hearts? Like, we know that our bishops are completely, off the rails with they're basically a mouthpiece for the government. The media, we can't trust them. They're not going to give us the facts. Our government is all about the business of psychological warfare and lying and God knows what other kind of biological or traditional warfare. So what do we do in the midst of all this? Like, what are we, we can't find the truth, or it's very difficult to find the truth or the facts. We don't want to be, irresponsible toward our fellow man by spreading germs or whatever.
All woman. Hello,
woman. Yeah. And, yes, some of us will start showering every day instead of
Very good start.
But what do we do? Like, how do we handle this? Do you have any advice for us?
I'd say the best piece of advice I could give to anyone, absolutely anyone, is Christ is risen. That's it. Don't need anything else other than that. Christ is risen.
Well, that's very simple.
I lay it on the line. I'm not here to. This is it. This is the good news. St. Paul says, if Christ isn't risen, our faith is in vain. It's absolutely right.
But if Christ
has risen, then
are we supposed to fight these powers or resist them somehow, or like?
Of course, you got to resist evil. You can't just let evil run rampant. Jesus didn't do that. Now there are people out there resisting. Now, I read yesterday in the paper where gun sales are sky high now. Sky high. People are full of fear. And they're getting their guns in order to protect their toilet paper.
Right. Like in the 1950s, people were building their atomic bomb shelters and all that. Yeah.
And of course, that was another big lie, huh? Imagine the government spent millions over years telling children to go under desk and duck and cover and clearing out Times Square and having people go into the subway in case of an atomic attack, until Dorothy Day walked out in I guess it was Washington Square in the middle of an air raid drill for an atomic bomb, and a few people with her, and golly, they really didn't want to arrest her, because if she got arrested, she'd go on a stand and become publicity, and they knew darn right well that none of this stuff could protect against an atomic bomb. Everyone would be smashed to molecules if an atomic bomb hit New York City. You're not going to move 8 million people out of the city. She put the lie to it, and that was the end of it. No, but you see, it was the same thing. It was the use of fear to control people, and you control people with fear. Fear of what? In that case, it was the communists who had the atomic bomb. Oh, my goodness, Ellen. Governments work on fear. And to a large extent, the church does too. But it's very, very important to recognize that. It seems to me very important to recognize spiritually now that fear is the opposite of love in the New Testament, not hate. Where fear reigns, love can't be. Love drives out fear. It's right there. It's as clear as and that and therefore it becomes very important to see what's happening here, which is the pandemic that is really going on, Ellen, is the pandemic of fear all over the world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I see these stories of Italy and Germany. I talked to a lady from Germany last week, and she's 80 years old, age 78, and she's afraid to leave her house. Perfectly healthy lady, but she's 78. She's afraid to leave the house, And the same thing. I talked to a woman this week from Italy, and she lives in Florence, and she said it's weird. It's like Twilight Zone to be in the middle of Florence and not a soul. It's packed usually, not a soul.
Yeah.
And they're not there because of fear. Fear. Fear of the virus, fear of the police. It will just multiply, huh? And so so fear that the Japanese are coming, fear that the Germans are coming.
Fear of the terrorists.
Fear of the terror. Oh, that's a beauty. Fear of the terrorist. Oh, I get into the church. Fear of God. That sort of business.
Yeah.
Fear of the priest, the bishop, call it what you will. But be that as it may, this is all about fear. The whole thing is about fear. And if I were a bishop, my whole moment at this time would be to tell people they have nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. I tell them, look, the first, Jesus came to conquer fear. Conquer it completely. You have nothing to fear. Fear not is the first word. First words in the gospel when the angel comes to visit Mary. Fear not. When Jesus is born, God incarnate is born in Bethlehem, the first words the shepherds hear are, fear not. When Jesus rises from the dead, and all the apostles and disciples are self-quarantined in a room in Jerusalem because they fear the Jews and the Romans, Jesus walks in and says, fear not. And so, yes, fear, but it doesn't mean by will to fear not. It means look. Jesus proclaims that God, let's put it this way. I think I mentioned to you one time that when Einstein was asked the question, is the universe a safe place for a human being to be? His answer was absolutely not. From the moment the human being is conceived, the universe is trying to kill him or her, and will do it 100% of the time. It is not a safe place for you. Whether one of those 380 trillion viruses that you have on you now is going to kill you, and who knows? Or the 40 trillion bacteria, they can get you. And you've got no way to control it. Or a heart attack, or a stroke, or I don't know, you name it,
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's absolutely the most unsafe situation that a human being can imagine. From all over, there are things happening that are going to destroy you, or could destroy you. And so we build pentagons, and we have arms races and this and that to protect us from this and that. The Russians are coming, and in the middle of the sentence you have a heart attack. At any rate, there is only one way, one and only one way that a person can deal with fear, can vanquish fear, can live minimizing and eliminating fear, for fear objectively to be a non-issue in the human situation. Basically what I'm saying, there's only one way that a human being can genuinely have security in the human situation. And that is if God is who Jesus says he is. If God is the Father who loves each and every one, the Father of all, who loves each and every one infinitely. If God is love, agape, unconditional, everlasting love. If God, in fact, if God is with us, that's Emmanuel, God with us. If God is with us from before we were conceived, to our conception, to our life, and at our death, God, that means that life is not short. Life is infinitely long because God loves us. Only if God is who Jesus says he is, love. Unconditional love of you, me, and every one of the 7.5 billion people out there, and all the ones came before. Is it possible to have security, peace for a human being? But you see, way back, it's obviously clear in the first 3 centuries. This is before the Constantinian revolution and the use of violence in the church and the justification of it. In the first 3 centuries of the church, when there were some serious, very serious, at least 3 very, very serious empire-wide persecutions and local ones, of course, of Christians by the Roman Empire, and the church Christians were illegal for all those 300 years. Christians could not voluntarily go to their death in the Circus Maximus, etc., and without even trying to kill people, without even trying to fight back. There's not one sentence justifying Christians going to war or killing other people to save themselves. Not one sentence in the first 300 years. That's incredible. Written by a Christian. But they couldn't do that unless they felt totally secure in God's love, in God's promise of everlasting life in the resurrection of Jesus. And peace.
Yeah. And
that's it. Now, that's what I would be doing as a bishop. I would be laying it out there like that. And I would say, look, obey the laws. If they tell you right, the right answer, do that. I'm not saying do that, but stop the fear. Stop the fear. You don't need guns to defend your toilet paper. Look, if someone comes in your house and wants a roll of toilet paper, give it to him, As a matter of fact, suppose he wants to take the 42 rolls of toilet paper that you bought, all of them. Give it to them. Use the newspapers, use a leave.
Take a shower.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean,
but yeah, it's interesting, because I didn't mean to imply earlier that there was any situation in our human lives that where the gospel wouldn't apply. I didn't mean to say that earlier, but as you're speaking, Jesus did say, not as the world gives it to you, do I give you peace. So we can get from the world peace from our hand sanitizer and our toilet papers and our guns and our atomic bomb shelters and our retirement.
Vegetarian diets, low carb diets, looking in the mirror after we put our after we get our hair weave or we put on our mascara or whatever, a lot of peace.
Trophies. Yeah, the world will give us security and peace in different ways, but Jesus is like, that's not the kind of peace I'm going to give you.
That's not the peace that is forever.
Yeah.
As soon as the lipstick wears off or the hair weave doesn't quite look right, and then there's no peace.
But I will say, I think, it's one thing to kind of, I do kind of subscribe to the whole, work out your salvation with fear and trembling thing.
Look, when you say work out your salvation in fear and trembling, the word fear, the biblical word fear means reverent awe, A-W-E. A-W-E.
Wait, you're talking about fear in what language means that?
Fear, we're talking about what is meant by fear of the Lord.
Okay.
Awe of the Lord. Now,
I guess just
remember in the early church, remember when you go into the catacombs, St. Callista's catacombs in Rome, and you go in there, and what you see is that the primary symbol in the catacombs, this is persecution and so forth, the primary symbol is not the cross, is not this, it's the Good Shepherd. Just as you go in the first part, the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd was the primary symbol in Christianity for 200 years in Rome. And who's the Good Shepherd? He's the one that goes out after the old lost sheep. and gets him, because the poor guy, when the sheep gets lost, it becomes paralyzed. It stays in its place. So the good shepherd has to go out and get him, and he gets it. And a matter of, yeah, really. And
So do
so
you think that after death, the good shepherd can still get us, or is time up? Time's over, game over. That's it.
well,
Like we had our chance.
well, think about it this way: does God cease to be love after death? No, unconditional love, not in general, but of you. Does God cease to love you after death? No, he doesn't cease to love you after death. Will God keep trying to love you in all the creative ways that are infinitely available to him to get you into heaven? Yes. And I think I don't know if you have it there, may not, but I wrote a booklet one time on the symbolism and an icon of Edith Stein, and I quoted Edith Stein at the end of it, where she said where she says something like let me get it right now, where she says, what about all those people that never knew Jesus or never knew God,
Yeah. What
that
about them?
went through life indifferent to God just because that's the way they were, and that died in that state? What about all those people? She says, is it possible that when they meet God face to face after they die, when they meet him face to face in all his love, they'll want to continue in that state? That whatever evil they did, that's what they'd want to choose forever? And will God, in his infinite love, not pursue them in eternity like he pursued them in earth, like the hound of heaven? Or does his infinite love for people stop at death? I mean, these are good questions. She says, Edith Stein says, it's a clever, I mean, not clever, that's the wrong word. It's a brilliant answer. Edith Stein says, while it is possible that someone who met the God of love face to face would still turn away from him for all eternity, it is, and here is the genius. She says, it is infinitely improbable. You see what's being said?
I mean, it almost sounds like she's saying that it's possible that hell is empty. Is that
Yes, yes, because see, as long as there's human freedom, there has to be a hell. Because human freedom brings with it not only the ability to love, but if it's genuinely human freedom, it has to be the ability not to love. So if I'm a human being and you take away my freedom, I'm like Pavlov's dog. I'm just responding to stimuli. So if I'm still the human being, Charlie McCarthy, after death, then I have my freedom. And I have my freedom to choose love, choose God, or choose against it. But if I really knew God, unveiled, unclouded, face to face, and all his awe, glory, love, would I choose not to be there for all eternity, rather than continue over and over and over again for all eternity to make the decision not to be with God? And what she's saying is, while it has to be possible, because once you take human freedom away from people, they're no longer human beings. So she says, yes, it's possible that someone could do that, which means it's possible someone could be in hell for all eternity. But then she says, it is infinitely improbable. Nothing in our consciousness says that if we were in the presence and the embrace of the God of infinite, unconditional love of us personally, that we'd want to choose against that for all eternity. So the point is, Ellen, is that, yes, we don't know any talk about what goes on after death, that the golden streets and everyone has a Lamborghini, you know. That's nonsense. Or a happy hunting ground, or whatever it is, you know. That's nonsense. But what is true is that God is the God that Jesus proclaims, which is different from all other gods, all other proclamations of God, and that Jesus embodies, is a God who is the opposite of fear. He drives, by his love, he drives out fear, and there is no fear in God as there's no violence in God. So by living in awe of the awesomeness of the majesty, the grandeur, the wonder, the greatness, the glory of God, living in that presence, which then is imbued and radiates infinite love for you. Yeah, now we're talking about living, working out our salvation in fear.
Yeah.
It's not God holding a gun at your head. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, the question always arises: if you fear, can you love? In other words, fear commands respect. It commands obedience. But can it ever command love?
Yeah.
Hmm? You see the problem here. Now, let me just, you got me off track there a half hour ago. Yeah. Now, I'm not, now I could go on about this, but all I'm saying, and I don't even know how we got here because we're talking about the coronavirus 19, but I think we got here by saying, by saying the thing for the bishops to do is just tell people Christ is risen. He's with us in love. We're always with him in love. Life is not short. Life is eternally long. Life and death is changed, not in it's right there in the preface of the funeral mass, and be at peace. And be at peace. Don't just work at ending fear by concentrating on the reality of God with us, the God of Jesus with us. Let it be that now and live out of that. I would have no problem whatsoever saying that we should have more respirators. That's all there is to it. We should have more respirators. If the government won't give them, the church should reach into its $100 trillion bank account and pull some out, buy some. But you see, that leads us into the spiritual part of this coronavirus 19. You see, in the Old Testament, the critical story is the Passover. The Passover comes about when Pharaoh is told by Moses to let my people go. He's told to do something that God wants done. Now, the word Hebrew means slave. The Pharaoh is told, leave these slaves go. Now, the slaves in Egypt, they were doing all the things that glorified Pharaoh, the Egyptian state. They were building, their whole lives were spent, men, women, children, families, building those pyramids. That today we don't even know how they were built with just human labor, without the machinery. And so so what takes place is Pharaoh is using up the mind, the time, the energy, the creativity, the intelligence of hundreds of thousands of people to build things to his own glory and to the glory of Egypt. Which money, time, mind, creativity is now being used for that, and it's not being used for other things that people need to live. And so the plagues on Egypt which are ever increasing in their seriousness, up until the final one, the plagues on Egypt actually have historical precedent and geographical precedent. But the point is, they could be defended against. If you would want to redirect that energy that's now being used to glorify the person, to glorify the state, if you wanted to redirect it into the things that need to be done to minimize the pain of people, and taking care of the Nile River properly, taking care of the bugs properly, and on it goes. And eventually, one right after another, Pharaoh says yes, then he says no, and no, we're going to go back to the way it was. And here comes another plague, just worse. And here comes another one. And here comes the final one. The final one that even kills his own family. Now, what we have here in the United States, just to use what we're familiar with, but the same could be said in Western Europe and Japan, etc., China maybe. What we have here is we are squandering, literally squandering, the intelligence, the goodwill, the creativity, all the assets of society, or at least over 50% of them, into making weapons and going to war, doing terrible things. We are squandering it on military might. And so an HIV virus somehow comes around, whether it's made or an accidental, I don't know what happens, but whatever it, no one's in any position to do anything about it. It takes 20 years to find something that can really work. And so we have a coronavirus today, 19. And there's no medicine, there's no vaccine, there's no anything else to deal with it. In fact, we don't even know where it came from. But we do know that we've spent a lot of money on weapons, on tanks, on B-52 bombers, on drones, on germ warfare, on HARP, weather warfare. My heavens. It all could have been gone to developing intelligence and having people work on things that make life better for people. Make it more peaceful. Make it a world where it's easier to be good. But it wasn't. It isn't.
Yeah.
To use Martin Buber saying, the ultimate deception of evil is that we think we can control it once we've let it loose. You want to make germ warfare? Okay, but things are happening. Consequences are going out all over the place. You think you want to know what's going on? You don't know what's going on. As Hamlet said to Horatio, Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth than your philosophies ever dreamt of, or your sciences. There are layers and layers to reality, but we know that God has given us great intelligence, great creativity, and we're squandering it. First of all, by not nurturing it, and secondly, by when we nurture it, we take a guy with a PhD and we send him over to Draper Labs at MIT to make nuclear weapons. Yeah, we kind of eventually got around and with serious problems, HIV, we'll get around Corona-19. Oh, all kinds of changes will be made, and we'll think that's going to be our security and that's going to be our protection. But if the society, and which I mean the people in the society, if the society is using up their resources, tremendous resources that have never been given to any other society, if it's using up its resources contrary to the will of God as revealed by Jesus, then it's on the path to self-destruction. And this is what we know from Scripture. Now, how do we avoid that? We repent. Repent. Individually, collectively, and we simply do. We use our intelligence, our mind, our time, our money, our wealth, our minerals, our resources in the spirit of Christ-like love.
So you don't think, Charlie, that God ever sends a plague to punish people?
Oh, no. Plagues, like all judgment, are the result of judgment in Scripture is people bring it on themselves. Their actions, their choices. If a man's been drinking a fifth of whiskey every night for 15 years, and one night three-headed snakes come over the bed to eat him, that's not God sending three-headed snakes. That's the result of boozing for 15 years. And so the same thing is always, we get trapped in our own evil. We enter in to a viper's web of evil, and then we get entangled in it, and we can't get ourselves out of it. That's what's happened. And therefore, from this web of evil that we're entangled in, and that we entangle generation after generation in before they can even think, we can't get out by reason alone. We have to be saved. And the entire Christian Jewish Scripture understands auto-salvation is impossible. There's no way out of it except if salvation comes from God, if God saves. Jesus comes as the Savior of the world. And now how he does that, that's open to all kinds of conjecture, and we found ways of making that almost mechanical, mechanistic. But is it possible that he comes as Savior of the world by telling us how to live ordinary, everyday lives of ordinary people universally in order to extricate ourselves from entanglement in the viper's web of evil that we've sown around ourselves? And I say yes. Yes. There may be a metaphysical dimension to that, but there is a moral dimension to what it means that Jesus saves. He puts out there how to use our freedom to help ourselves, and indeed ultimately all humanity, disentangle ourselves from our own evil and the evil of our ancestors. And to leave something in the future that either is not as serious an entanglement in evil or not an entanglement of evil for future generations. But if we're not going to do that, if we're going to build people, just to use an example, if we're going to invest in people and get them PhDs in, say, microbiology, and then use that person to make germ warfare, we'll just hang around, wait for the next plague. That is evil. Instead of using it to find out a way to help people who have this disease or that disease, or to avoid this disease or that disease. It is important to recognize that the kind of judgment that comes, what we call God's judgment makes an atomic war look like child play. Because, now watch this, God's judgment is the evil we bring upon ourselves and embed in our hearts, in our minds, in our spirits, not just in terms of what is bodily happening to us, but what is happening to us within those 100 billion neurons, brain cells, that make up the most unique and complex reality in all of the universe, the human brain. God's judgment which is not God saying like a district court judge, I'm giving you 5 years in prison or I'm putting you on the rack. God's judgment is with our judgment of ourselves. It is far beyond anything that could be imagined in terms of physical suffering. And anyone that has ever gone and tried to work in a mental institution should realize how terrible psychological judgment is, how terrible the consequences are of evil eating away at the brain, while the brain physically is just fine. So I raise all this, Ellen, because this is a moment in time. There are signs of the times to talk to, and it's a moment that has tremendous spiritual significance. Yeah. But its spiritual significance is going to be undermined if what we try to do with it is to talk to it out of a Constantinian consciousness of justice, fear, anguish, instead of talking to it from the notion that the God who is given to us in Jesus is love, is Father, is Abba, is peace. Anyway, the coronavirus is a teachable moment. And it should be more than a moment when we simply cope with mass media and government fears. The real thing going on here is the pandemic of fear that governments, media, and this virus has created on a planetary scale. And that is where the church comes in, and that is where the church has its duty to respond with all the power of love it has, with all the knowledge it has of the will of God as revealed in and by and through and with Jesus.
And you were talking about how fear is contagious, but if we had that peace within ourselves, I think that would be contagious too.
Oh, you know? I've seen it. I've seen how people who have that peace within themselves and have it in crisis situations, the crisis mongers can be all around them. And if they keep that focus, it's like Peter getting out of the boat and there's the waves on all sides that are going to crush him. And as long as he keeps looking at Jesus, peace. He can walk on water. He can do miracles. Or let him look at the waves. Let him look at all the fear objects out there that can induce fear in him. And he's a goner. He sinks.
Yeah.
Now you send those guns back and you let people have whatever toilet paper they want if they try to, run into your house and steal it.
I'm going to be handing it out on the streets tomorrow. Free toilet paper for everyone.
Well, Ellen, you are the Christian. I'm telling you.